What drives people to risk their lives in the wilderness? Some seek adventure, others long for a connection with nature, and a few make fatal mistakes. But in bear country, one wrong step can mean the difference between life and death. From heroic rescues gone wrong to unexpected ambushes, these chilling stories reveal how unpredictable the wild can be. Even the most experienced outdoors people aren't safe when they cross paths with nature's fiercest predators. Do you know what to do if you're ever face to face with a bear? On March 4, 2025, a cold wind swept through the snow-covered forests of a national park in the northwest corner of Wyoming. The trees stood tall and silent, their branches heavy with fresh snow. Dylan Westbrook moved carefully along the narrow path, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. He had spent years exploring the wilderness, studying animals, and learning their ways. The outdoors had always been his home, where he felt most alive. Dylan had been hiking for hours, following a familiar trail. He knew the dangers of the wild, but he also believed in respecting nature. His backpack carried supplies, a small first aid kit, and a camera to document his journey. He often shared his experiences with others, hoping to teach them about the beauty of wildlife. As he walked deeper into the woods, a sound broke the stillness. A low, painful cry echoed through the trees. Dylan stopped, his heart pounding. It was not the call of a bird or the rustling of the wind. It was something different, something in distress. He followed the sound, moving carefully through the thick snow. The cries grew louder, filled with pain and fear. Then he saw it. A massive grizzly bear lay in the snow, its body tense and trembling. One of its legs was trapped in a steel clamp, the sharp metal cutting deep into its flesh. Blood stained the white snow, and the bear's breathing was heavy and labored. Its eyes were wide with fear, and its powerful body shivered from pain. Dylan's heart ached at the sight. He knew the dangers of getting close, but could not leave the animal to suffer. Slowly, he removed his backpack and knelt a few feet away. He studied the trap, realizing it would take great care to release it without hurting the bear further. His hands were steady, but his mind raced. He had freed animals before, but never something this powerful. He reached for a thick branch, hoping to pry the steel apart. The bear let out another painful cry, its muscles twitching. Dylan worked as quickly as he could, knowing time was running out. With one strong motion, the trap loosened. The metal snapped open, and the bear pulled its injured leg free. For a moment, everything was still. The bear lay in the snow, breathing heavily. Dylan felt a wave of relief wash over him. He had done what he came to do. But then, something changed. The bear's eyes locked onto him, filled with something new: fear, confusion, and rage. Before Dylan could move, the grizzly lunged forward, sending him crashing onto the frozen ground with its massive paws. The force of the attack knocked the air from his lungs, and pain exploded through his body as sharp claws tore into him. The snow around them turned red, and the wilderness, once peaceful, became a place of terror. The bear's weight pressed down on Dylan, and its claws tore through his clothes and skin. The snow beneath him turned dark with blood. His body struggled against the unbearable force, but the grizzly was too strong. Its powerful jaws clamped onto his shoulder, shaking him like prey. The pain was overwhelming, but there was nothing he could do. The bear's breathing was heavy, and its injured leg was making it unsteady. It growled in pain and confusion, its instincts taking over. Dylan's body went limp beneath the massive creature. The grizzly struck again, its claws slicing through him, leaving him still and unmoving. The once peaceful forest had turned into a scene of violence. For several moments, everything was quiet except for the bear's labored breaths. It lifted its head, its ears twitching as it listened to the silent trees. The cold air was thick with the scent of blood. The grizzly hesitated, its body still weak from the trap. Then, slowly, it backed away, leaving Dylan behind in the snow. Hours passed before park rangers arrived. A search team had been sent after Dylan failed to return. The sun had begun to set, casting long shadows over the frozen ground. The sight they found was haunting. Dylan's lifeless body lay still, surrounded by disturbed snow and deep claw marks. His backpack was a few feet away, untouched, as if a reminder of his final act. The park rangers followed the bear's tracks, knowing it could still be dangerous. They moved cautiously, scanning the trees for any sign of movement. It did not take long to find the grizzly. Weakened by its wounds, the bear had not gone far. Following safety protocols, the rangers took action, ending the bear's life. It was a tragic end to an already heartbreaking event. News of Dylan's fate spread quickly. The park community, fellow hikers, and wildlife experts mourned the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to nature. Many struggled to understand how an act of kindness had led to such a devastating outcome. Some believed the bear had acted out of instinct, unable to tell friend from foe. Others questioned the risks of human interaction with wild animals. National park officials reviewed safety guidelines, reminding visitors of wildlife's unpredictable nature. The area where the attack happened was temporarily restricted, allowing officials to assess any further risks. Discussions arose about the dangers of illegal traps, often leading to unpredictable and tragic encounters between animals and humans. Dylan's family and friends honored his memory, remembering his passion for the outdoors. His story served as a warning and reflects his deep love for wildlife. People who had followed his adventures shared their grief, recognizing the risks that came with his dedication. As time passed, the forest remained unchanged, untouched by human emotions. The trees stood tall, the snow continued to fall, and the wild remained as it always had been: beautiful, dangerous, and unforgiving. In February 2025, the Alaskan wilderness remained covered in snow, with icy rivers flowing through the remote landscape. An experienced fisherman, Tommy Richards, had spent years navigating these harsh conditions. Growing up in Alaska, he had learned to fish in some of the most unforgiving waters. Fishing was not just a hobby for him, but a way of life. He knew the risks of being in the wild, but the peace he found by the river always made it worth it. That morning, Tommy had set out early, going to a quiet river deep in the backcountry. The area was known for its rich supply of salmon, drawing both fishermen and wildlife. The air was crisp. The only sounds were the flowing water and the occasional call of an eagle overhead. Dressed in warm layers, he stood at the river's edge, casting his line into the cold water, waiting for the day's first catch. Hours passed as Tommy focused on fishing, completely immersed in the moment. He had not noticed the large figure moving through the trees in the distance. A massive and powerful Kodiak bear was also drawn to the river. The bear had likely been searching for food, its instincts guiding it toward the water where fish were plentiful. When Tommy finally spotted the bear, it was standing near the tree line, watching him. He remained calm, knowing that bears often avoided people unless threatened. He assumed the bear would eventually move on if he kept his distance and did not provoke it. Tommy continued fishing and watching the animal, but felt no immediate danger. Without warning, the bear suddenly charged forward. It closed the distance between them in seconds, its heavy paws pounding against the snow. Tommy barely had time to react before the bear slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. His fishing rod flew from his hands as he hit the cold earth. The force of the impact left him gasping for breath, his heart racing. The bear's claws tore through his clothes, cutting into his chest. Tommy struggled beneath the enormous weight, trying to push the animal off. He reached for his bear spray, but his hands shook, making it difficult to grab. The grizzly let out a deep growl, its powerful jaws snapping just inches away from him. Before he could react, the bear sank its teeth into his side, dragging him toward the trees. The pain was unbearable, but he knew he had to fight. He tried to kick and push against the bear's massive body, but it was too strong. The sound of crunching snow and breaking branches filled the air as the bear pulled him further away from the river. Tommy's vision blurred from the pain, but his fishing knife fell from his pocket just then. With his last bit of strength, he reached out, gripping the handle tightly. This was his only chance to survive. Tommy gripped the knife as tightly as he could, ignoring the pain in his body. The bear held on to him, its powerful jaws pressing into his side. Summoning all his remaining strength, he lifted the knife and drove it into the bear's leg. The sharp blade sank deep, and the bear let out a deep roar, pulling back briefly. That small window was all Tommy needed. He pushed himself away from the animal, gasping for air. His entire body ached, and his clothes were torn and covered in blood. The bear stood a few feet away, growling in pain and anger. It hesitated, shifting its weight, unsure whether to continue the attack or retreat. The wound on its leg seemed to weaken it, and after a long, tense moment, it turned and disappeared into the trees. Tommy lay on the frozen ground, struggling to keep his eyes open. His body felt heavy, and every breath hurt. He knew he could not stay there for long. The temperature was dropping, and his injuries were severe. If he did not move soon, he would not survive. Using what little strength he had left, he crawled toward the river where he had left his backpack. The journey felt endless, every movement sending sharp pain through his body. Finally reaching the riverbank, he grabbed his backpack and pulled out a small emergency kit. His hands were shaking as he pressed a cloth against his wounds, trying to slow the bleeding. His side throbbed where the bear had bitten him, the deep wounds making it hard to move. He knew he needed help, but was miles away from any town or ranger station. His only chance was to send a distress signal. Tommy reached into his pocket, and pulled out a small emergency beacon. He pressed the button, sending a signal to the nearest rescue team. Then, his body exhausted, he leaned against a rock. The minutes passed slowly, each one feeling longer than the last. He fought to stay awake, knowing that if he lost consciousness, he might not wake up again. Hours later, the sound of approaching footsteps reached his ears. A team of rangers had received his signal and tracked his location. When they found him, he was barely conscious, his body cold and weak. The rescuers quickly assessed his injuries, wrapping his wounds and preparing him for transport. They carried him to a helicopter waiting nearby, flying him to the nearest hospital. Tommy survived the attack, but the experience changed him forever. The deep scars on his body served as a reminder of that terrifying day. Even after recovering, the memory of the bear never left him. He continued fishing but never again went into the wilderness alone. The attack was reported widely, warning about the dangers of the wild. It reminded everyone that nature is unpredictable and that survival often comes down to a moment of luck or instinct. In early January 2025, Maggie Brooks stood at the top of a remote mountain slope in the Chugach Range of Alaska. The cold wind rushed past her face, and the snow beneath her board was untouched. She had spent years snowboarding in the backcountry, always seeking new, challenging terrain. Maggie had trained hard to handle extreme conditions, but nothing could have prepared her for what she was about to face. The morning had started perfectly. Maggie had checked the weather, packed her safety gear, and set off early to explore an area she had never ridden. She was confident in her skills and understood the risks of snowboarding in the wild. However, she did not know that danger was waiting beneath the snow. As she carved through the fresh powder, Maggie felt an adrenaline rush. The thrill of moving fast through the untouched snow made every trip worthwhile. She weaved between trees, careful to avoid hidden obstacles. The silence of the mountains surrounded her, broken only by the sound of her board slicing through the snow. Then, in an instant, the ground beneath her shifted. A section of snow collapsed, sending her tumbling forward. She lost control and landed hard near a cluster of trees. She noticed something unusual as she pushed herself up, a dark opening in the snow just a few feet away. It was a bear den. Before she could react, the forest silence was shattered by a deep, angry roar. A massive grizzly bear emerged from the den, its fur thick and dusted with snow. Maggie's heart pounded as she realized she had disturbed a hibernating bear. The mother bear, startled and defensive, moved toward her with incredible speed. Maggie knew she had to act fast, but there was no time to escape. The bear reached her in seconds, knocking her off her feet. She hit the ground hard as the bear swiped at her, its claws tearing through her jacket. Maggie tried to roll away, using her arms to shield her face. The bear was relentless, swiping and pushing her deeper into the snow. She gasped for breath, the cold seeping into her body as she struggled to stay conscious. In desperation, she reached for her backpack, hoping to grab the small can of bear spray she always carried. But before she could use it, the bear slammed into her again, sending her rolling down the slope. She crashed into a snowbank, her body aching from the impact. The world around her blurred as she lay still, struggling to fight the darkness creeping into her vision. The last thing she heard before everything went black was the distant sound of movement, something approaching through the trees. Then everything faded away, leaving the frozen wilderness silent once more. Maggie Brooks lay motionless in the snow, her body barely visible beneath the thick white layer that had settled around her. The cold seeped through her clothing, numbing her limbs. Her breaths were shallow, and her heartbeat slowed as her body fought against the freezing air. Time passed, but she did not move. The grizzly bear, now calmer, stood nearby, its massive body blending with the surroundings. It sniffed the air before turning away, disappearing into the trees, and leaving the silent landscape behind. Minutes turned into hours, as the wilderness remained undisturbed. Maggie remained unconscious, her body covered in bruises and scratches. Blood had seeped into the snow from the deep wounds left by the bear's claws. The wind howled through the trees, shifting the snow around her. She was alone in the freezing wilderness, far from any sign of help. Farther down the slope, a group of snowboarders rode through the backcountry. They had planned a day of adventure and were unaware of what had happened to Maggie. One spotted something unusual in the distance as they rode through the snow. A bright piece of fabric stood out against the white ground. They stopped and moved closer, realizing someone was lying in the snow. They rushed to her side, their voices urgent as they tried to wake her. One pulled out a radio and called for help, sending a signal to the nearest rescue team. They checked her injuries, making sure she was still breathing. Her face was pale, and her body was cold, but she was alive. They wrapped her in extra layers to keep her warm while waiting for help. The rescue team arrived within minutes, navigating the rough terrain on snowmobiles. They carefully lifted Maggie onto a stretcher, securing her for transport. As they moved her towards safety, one of the rescuers noticed large paw prints in the snow nearby. The tracks confirmed what had happened: a bear attack. The team worked quickly, knowing that every second mattered. Maggie was transported to a hospital in Anchorage, where doctors immediately began treating her wounds. She had suffered deep scratches on her arms and back, as well as bruises from the impact of the attack. The medical team worked to warm her body, preventing further harm from the cold. She remained unconscious for hours before finally opening her eyes. Days later, news of the attack spread through the snowboarding community. Many were shocked that an experienced snowboarder like Maggie had faced such danger. Wildlife officials tracked the bear and relocated it to a safer area, far from human activity. The event served as a warning to others who ventured into the wilderness. Maggie's injuries slowly healed, but the experience left a deep mark on her. She had survived something most people never faced. Though she would return to the mountains, she would always remember the day she came face to face with nature's raw power. In July 2024, a national park in northwestern Montana was alive with the sounds of nature. The towering peaks stood tall against the blue sky, and the dense forests stretched as far as the eye could see. An experienced wildlife guide, Amanda Stevens, led a small group of tourists along a remote trail. She had spent years studying the park's wildlife and knew every path, river, and clearing. Her job was to teach visitors about the beauty of nature while ensuring their safety in the unpredictable wilderness. The group of tourists, all eager to explore. Among them was David Hunter, a photographer hoping to capture stunning landscape images. The others were a young couple, Lisa and Mark, who loved hiking, and an older man named Richard, who had always dreamed of visiting the park. They followed Amanda closely, listening as she shared details about the plants and animals that thrived in the area. The air was fresh, and the sunlight filtered through the trees, creating patterns on the ground. Birds chirped from the branches, and the soft rustling of leaves filled the air. The group moved carefully, staying on the marked trail. Amanda reminded them to keep their voices low and avoid sudden movements that could disturb any nearby animals. Amanda noticed signs of wildlife as they walked: deep paw prints in the mud, scratch marks on a tree, and a strong scent. She knew they were in bear territory, but there was no immediate danger. She kept a watchful eye on the surroundings, ready to guide the group safely through. Suddenly, they reached a small clearing, and Amanda stopped. In the distance, a massive grizzly bear stood over a carcass, its powerful frame visible even afar. The group froze, their excitement turning to fear. Amanda knew bears were especially protective of their food, and any sudden movement could provoke an attack. She signaled the group to remain calm and slowly started guiding them away. The bear lifted its head, sniffing the air. Its sharp eyes locked onto the group, and within seconds, it let out a deep growl. Amanda's heart pounded as the bear lowered its body, its muscles tensing. She had seen this stance before. It was preparing to charge. Before anyone could react, the bear lunged forward, covering the distance between them with shocking speed. David, frozen with fear, failed to move. The bear slammed into him, knocking him to the ground. He struggled as the bear's massive paws pinned him down, his body trapped beneath its weight. Amanda knew she had to act fast. She reached for her bear spray, but the bear had already shifted its attention. It swung its massive claws, striking Amanda's side and leaving deep scratches as she stumbled backward. The rest of the group screamed, scrambling to find safety. With no other choice, Amanda grabbed the flare gun from her pack. She raised it and fired into the sky, hoping the sudden light and noise would stop the attack. The flare gun fired into the air, sending a bright flash of light above the trees. The loud noise echoed through the forest, breaking the stillness of the wild. The grizzly bear paused briefly, startled by the sudden burst of light and sound. It let out a deep growl, its ears twitching as it stepped back. The flames flickered in the sky before fading, leaving behind a trail of smoke. Amanda held her breath, hoping that the bear would retreat. For a few seconds, the bear hesitated, its eyes still locked onto the group. The tension in the air was heavy. Amanda did not move, her heart pounding as she focused on the massive animal. Slowly, the bear shifted its weight and turned away, disappearing into the dense forest. The sound of its heavy footsteps faded, leaving only the rustling of leaves behind. The attack had lasted only moments, but the impact was severe. David lay on the ground, his body trembling from shock. His clothes were torn, and his chest was covered in scratches where the bear had pinned him down. Blood stained the snow beneath him. Amanda struggled to stay on her feet, her side aching from where the bear had struck her. Her shirt was ripped, and deep claw marks ran across her ribs, stinging with every breath. The rest of the group hurried to help them. Lisa and Mark rushed to David to check on his injuries. Richard held Amanda's arm, trying to keep her steady. Everyone was shaken, their faces pale from fear. The once peaceful trail now felt dangerous, and the weight of what had happened settled over them. Amanda knew they had to leave the area immediately. The bear was gone, but it could return at any time. Ignoring the pain, she helped David sit up. His breathing was unsteady, but he nodded, showing he could walk. Step by step, they moved back toward the path they had come from, keeping close together. Every sound in the forest felt louder now, and every movement in the trees made them tense. After an eternity, they reached the edge of the trail, where the park's emergency station was. Rangers arrived within minutes, alerted by the flare gun's signal. They helped Amanda and David onto stretchers and quickly assessed their injuries. Then, they asked the group what had happened, taking notes as they listened. The Rangers reassured them that the bear would be tracked and relocated to prevent further danger. Amanda and David were taken to a nearby hospital. David's wounds were treated, and though he was bruised and scratched, he would recover. Amanda's injuries were also cleaned and bandaged, her ribs sore from the bear's claws. The group remained shaken, but they were grateful to be alive. The attack became a warning to others visiting the park. News spread about the close encounter, and officials reminded visitors of the risks of the wild. Amanda's quick thinking had saved lives, but the memory of the bear's charge would stay with them forever. In February 2025, Jesse Turner and his wife Maya were asleep in their small cabin deep in the forests of Montana. The couple had chosen this quiet place to live away from the city's noise. Jesse, a former park ranger, loved the outdoors and spent most of his time hunting and fishing. Maya enjoyed gardening and taking care of their home. Their cabin stood alone, surrounded by tall trees and snowy hills, with only a few neighbors miles away. The night was cold, and the wind howled outside. Jesse and Maya were tucked under warm blankets when a loud crash echoed through the house. The noise was sharp and sudden, waking Jesse from his deep sleep. His heart pounded as he sat up, listening closely. Something had broken inside the kitchen. He quickly reached for his shotgun, which he always kept near the bed for safety. Maya stirred beside him, still half asleep, unaware of what was happening. Jesse slowly stepped out of the bedroom, gripping his weapon tightly. As he moved down the dark hallway, another crash came from the kitchen. His pulse quickened. He had lived in the wild for years and knew something big had entered their home. His first thought was a raccoon or a coyote, but his breath caught in his throat as he reached the doorway. A large black bear stood in the middle of their kitchen, its massive body looming over the broken remains of their back door. Pieces of wood lay scattered on the floor. The bear had knocked over chairs and torn through the cabinets. It had likely been searching for food when it stumbled upon their cabin. The scent of leftover dinner must have attracted it inside. Jesse froze, his grip tightening on the shotgun. The bear turned its head and locked eyes with him. For a brief moment, neither moved. Then, without warning, the bear let out a deep growl and lunged forward. Jesse barely had time to react before the heavy paw swiped across his chest. The force knocked him backward, slamming him against the wooden floor. A sharp pain shot through his ribs as he gasped for air. Adrenaline surged through his body as he lifted his shotgun and fired a shot into the air. The loud bang echoed through the cabin, but the bear did not flee. Instead, it roared angrily and charged again, pinning him against the wall. Its sharp claws dug into his shoulder, sending a burning sensation through his arm. Jesse struggled to push it away, but the bear was too strong. At that moment, Maya rushed into the kitchen. She had woken up from the commotion and saw Jesse struggling. Without hesitation, she grabbed the closest object, a heavy frying pan, and swung it at the bear's head. The impact made a loud clang, causing the bear to recoil. It shook its head, stunned for a brief moment. That small distraction was enough. Jesse broke free and ran toward the door, pulling Maya with him. Jesse and Maya ran out of the cabin as fast as they could, their feet slipping on the frozen ground. The cold air burned their lungs, but they did not stop. Behind them, the bear roared in frustration, still inside the house. Jesse's shoulder throbbed with pain, and his chest ached with every breath. Blood dripped from his wounds, staining the snow as he moved forward. Maya held onto his arm, trying to keep him steady as they stumbled through the darkness. The nearest neighbor lived over a mile away, but they had no other choice. Their car was parked beside the cabin, but the keys remained inside. Stopping to go back was too dangerous. The bear could come after them at any moment. They kept moving, pushing through the deep snow. The wind howled around them, making every step more difficult. The sound of breaking wood echoed through the trees. The bear had started destroying their home, knocking over furniture and ripping through the walls. The terrifying noises followed them as they struggled toward safety. Jesse's strength faded, but he forced himself to move forward. The pain in his chest grew worse, and every breath felt heavier. After hours, they saw a faint light in the distance. The neighbor's house. Relief washed over them, but they could not slow down. Maya banged on the door with frozen hands, her body shaking from the cold and fear. The door opened, and they stumbled inside. Warm air surrounded them, but Jesse could barely stand. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the floor, his breathing shallow. Maya dropped beside him, holding onto his hand. The neighbors quickly called for help. Jesse's injuries needed urgent care, and Maya was still in shock. Minutes later, the sound of sirens filled the night. Paramedics rushed inside, lifting Jesse onto a stretcher. His body was weak, and his vision blurred as they checked his wounds. Maya followed close behind, refusing to leave his side. The ambulance sped toward the hospital, the flashing lights cutting through the darkness. Back at the cabin, wildlife officers arrived to handle the situation. The bear was still inside, tearing through what was left of the house. It had not left since the attack. The officers decided to put it down, ensuring it would not harm anyone else. The bear was euthanized, its body removed from the destroyed home. Days later, Jesse woke up in the hospital, his body covered in bandages. His wounds were deep, but he had survived. Maya sat beside him, her eyes filled with relief. Their home was gone, and their lives would never be the same. The peaceful place they had loved was now a place of fear. Even after Jesse recovered, the memories of that night stayed with them. They could never forget the terror of being trapped inside with a wild animal. Their cabin was rebuilt, but the feeling of safety never fully returned. In June 2024, Rachel Green embarked on a solo hike in a national park in northwestern Montana, eager to explore the breathtaking landscapes she had dreamed of visiting for years. The vast wilderness stretched around her, filled with towering mountains, dense forests, and crystal-clear lakes. The summer air was crisp, and birds echoed through the trees as she walked along the rugged trail. Rachel had always loved nature. Growing up in Colorado, she spent most of her childhood exploring the outdoors with her family. Her passion for hiking and photography led her to travel the country, capturing stunning moments in the wild. She often shared her adventures online, hoping to inspire others to appreciate the beauty of untouched places. The national park in northwestern Montana had been on her list for a long time, and now she was finally here, ready to experience its wonders. She packed light, carrying only the essentials: water, snacks, a map, and her bear spray, which she kept strapped to her backpack. Although she had read about bear safety and knew the risks, the excitement of being alone in nature made her feel free. Her trail was not crowded, allowing her to enjoy the peaceful surroundings without interruption. She planned to hike for a few hours before returning to her campsite. As she moved deeper into the park, she spotted something ahead that stopped her. A grizzly bear was foraging in the distance, its massive body moving slowly through the tall grass. Rachel's heart pounded with excitement. Seeing a wild bear was rare, and she knew this was a moment she had to capture. She reached for her phone, eager to take a picture. Without thinking, she stepped off the trail and moved closer to get a better shot. The bear continued searching for food, unaware of her presence. She lifted her phone and adjusted the angle for a perfect selfie with the animal in the background. The thrill of the moment made her forget the danger. Then, the bear turned its head. Its dark eyes locked onto her, and for a brief second, everything stood still. Rachel felt a chill run through her spine as she realized her mistake. Before she could react, the The grizzly let out a deep growl and charged toward her with shocking speed. Rachel stumbled backward, her breath catching in her throat. She tried to retreat, but the bear was already too close. In an instant, it slammed into her, knocking her to the ground. The impact sent pain shooting through her body as she landed hard on the dirt. She struggled to grab her bear spray, but her fingers fumbled and the canister slipped. The bear pinned her down, its powerful claws tearing into her leg. She screamed, but the vast wilderness swallowed her cries. There was no one nearby to help. The pain was overwhelming. Her vision blurred, and the last thing she saw was her phone still in her hand, capturing the final moments of her tragic encounter. The forest remained silent except for the grizzly bear moving away, leaving Rachel motionless. The air was still, and the trees stood tall around the scene, untouched by the tragedy that had just unfolded. The sun cast long shadows through the thick branches, but no one was there to witness what had happened. Time passed, and the wilderness remained unaware of the loss that had just occurred. Hours later, after reports of an abandoned backpack on the trail, park rangers arrived in the area. They moved carefully, scanning the surroundings for any sign of Rachel. Their voices echoed through the trees as they called her name, but there was no response. They followed tracks in the dirt, leading them deeper into the forest. Then they saw a phone lying in the grass. The screen cracked but still lit. Not far from it, Rachel was found, her body still and lifeless. The evidence of the attack was clear, her injuries revealing the struggle she had faced alone. The scene was documented as the rangers worked quickly to assess what had happened. The phone was recovered, its last image capturing the moment just before the attack. The sight of it sent a heavy silence through the team. They radioed for assistance, knowing this would be another reminder of the wild's danger. As investigations began, wildlife officials tracked the bear responsible for the attack. Its prints led them toward the area where it had retreated. Since it had acted on instinct rather than aggression, it was not immediately considered a threat. However, due to the circumstances, park authorities made the difficult decision to locate and monitor the animal closely to prevent further risks. News of Rachel's passing spread quickly. Her family, devastated by the loss, remembered her as someone who had always embraced adventure. Friends shared memories of her travels, recalling her passion for capturing nature's beauty. The online community that followed her journeys expressed their sorrow, sharing the last images she had posted before the incident. Officials used Rachel's story as a lesson for park visitors. They emphasized the importance of keeping safe from wildlife and warned against approaching animals for photographs. Rangers also increased their efforts to educate hikers, placing more signs along trails to remind visitors of the dangers that could arise when caution was not taken. As the seasons changed and years slipped by, the place where the attack had occurred remained eerily untouched. The towering trees still whispered in the wind, their branches reaching skyward as if unaware of the life lost beneath them. The rivers continued their endless journey, carving through the land as they always had. The mountains stood in their eternal silence, stretching across the horizon, indifferent to the passage of time. Nature carried on, unshaken by human tragedy. Yet, the landscape was forever altered for those who had known Rachel. To the world, it was just another stretch of untamed wilderness, but to them, it was sacred ground, a place where her spirit lingered in the rustling leaves and rushing water. Her love for the outdoors had led her to this final moment. Her story ended in heartbreak, but remained a poignant testament to the delicate balance between human ambition and nature's unyielding force. She had embraced the wild, and in doing so, became a part of it forever.